Senator Cornyn.
Mr. Rosenstein, I know you've dedicated almost your entire adult life to serving at the Department of Justice, and I know you love and revere that institution and the people that work there, and rightly so. But I can only imagine how disappointing it must be to you now to learn, following the revelations of the Inspector General's report and other investigations, some of the facts and circumstances leading up to the investigation of the Trump campaign. First of all, let me take you back to Director Comey. You wrote a memo, I believe it was in May of 2017, recommending to President Trump that he fire Director Comey, correct?
My memo to Attorney General Sessions, yes, sir.
Excuse me, you're right. Yeah, it was a memo to the Attorney General, and then that was forwarded to the President. And your principal concern, as I recall it in that memo, was that Director Comey usurped the role of the Department of Justice when he held a press conference on July 2016, where he said that Hillary Clinton was extremely reckless in the way she handled her email server, but he said that no reasonable prosecutor would prosecute her, and thus in the process of saying, well, she's probably not going to get charged with a crime, but nevertheless, let me tell you all about all the derogatory information. That was in violation of the norms and the rules and regulations of the Department of Justice, correct?
Yes.
And you concluded in your memo to Attorney General Sessions that he would probably do that again since he saw nothing wrong with the way he handled that, correct?
I don't recall my exact words, Senator, but I have it in front of me.
I think it's about the last sentence or so.
It's important that we have an FBI director who recognizes that that was wrong. Yes, sir.
And so this was an example of the FBI getting involved in the midst of a presidential political campaign and holding a press conference talking about derogatory information that they discovered, but then saying no reasonable prosecutor would prosecute. Can you explain to us why it's important that the Department of Justice, including the FBI, doesn't get involved in the middle of political campaigns?
Yes, Senator. I think there are a couple of issues there. One, obviously, is the sensitivity about campaigns. The other is the principle that the Department of Justice doesn't disparage people. Our prosecutors conduct investigations, and if they determine that they believe the evidence warrants prosecution and it meets the principles of federal prosecution, then they return indictments, and the jury and judge decide about guilt. If we don't indict people, Senator, it's not our job to disparage them. And so that's why I wrote that memo. It's also why I believe it's unfair and unfortunate that Carter Page FISA was leaked, because the principle here, Senator, is we conduct investigations, we presume people innocent, and we don't disparage them unless and until we have evidence that warrants prosecution.
Well, given the policy of the Department of Justice not to get involved during political campaigns and to attempt to influence those, it strikes me as unprecedented that in the 2016 timeframe, you had open investigations of both candidates running for president, both the Democratic nominee and the Republican nominee. Would you agree with me that there is no precedent for that in American history?
I believe that's correct.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how the FBI handled the investigation in Crossfire Hurricane. We've talked about the Steele dossier, but as you know, at the time, Christopher Steele was on the payroll of Fusion GPS to do opposition research for the Democratic National Committee on behalf of the Hillary Clinton campaign. He was also retained as a confidential human source by the FBI, correct?
I don't know all the details, Senator. What I do know, though, is that whoever was paying him is one issue. The other issue is what was the basis for believing he was credible? Did the FBI have an appropriate basis for believing he was credible? And the Inspector General report suggests that they misstated that or overstated their basis for believing he was credible.
Well, the Inspector General noted that Steele said, I don't work for the FBI, I work for Fusion GPS. I'm a businessman but I may pass some information that's useful to the FBI. Do you remember that?
I know that from the report. Yes, sir.
So at the same time that he was a confidential human source for the FBI, he was on the payroll of Fusion GPS doing opposition research for Hillary Clinton's campaign. He was ultimately terminated by the FBI for violating the rules by leaking the information to the press, but he continued to backdoor information to the FBI through Bruce Orr, correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I don't know the chronology of when he was on the payroll of Fusion GPS, but generally I believe that's correct.
And with the chairman's indulgence, let me ask if we can put footnote 350 on the screen. I asked Attorney General Barr back in May, I think it was, of 2019, I said, can we state with any confidence that the Steele dossier was not part of a Russian disinformation campaign? His answer was, well, that's one of the areas that I'm reviewing. I'm concerned about it, and I don't think it's entirely speculative. Well, we know that Bill Priestap, who was in charge of the counterintelligence division, said they did consider the possibility that Steele was a part of a Russian disinformation campaign, but then thanks to the diligence of Senator Grassley and Senator Johnson and the Director of National Intelligence, we now have a copy of the less redacted footnote 350 to the Inspector General report, which points out, if you can see it, that not only did Steele have regular interaction with Russian oligarchs, but that there was a potential for Russian disinformation influencing Steele's election reporting. And it did not have high confidence that the subsources for Steele's reporting and assessed that the reference subset was part of a Russian disinformation campaign to denigrate U.S. foreign relations. So, Mr. Rosenstein, it strikes me that Mr. Putin must be extraordinarily pleased with how this all played itself out. Not only was Hillary Clinton and her campaign disparaged, not only was President Trump and his campaign disparaged and put through what can only be described as hell for the last 3.5 years of an investigation, when in fact the source of some of the information that was used not only to secure a FISA warrant, but to conduct a counterintelligence investigation may in fact have been part of a Russian disinformation campaign. Does that concern you?
It concerns me very much, Senator, and I'm at a bit of a disadvantage. As you know, I was in the job for only 2 years. I've been gone now for about 13 months, so I don't have access to any information that's been generated through the Durham investigation. I do not know what Attorney General Barr has discovered with regard to that. But I think it's important, Senators, for us to keep in mind that it is established, I believe, that Russia's efforts included disparaging Hillary Clinton, as you said. That doesn't mean Russia is on the other candidate's side. Russia is on Russia's side. And so I think we should be just as concerned if there's evidence that they were disparaging or attacking or trying to undermine President Trump, as we were about their activities with regard to Secretary Clinton. So I don't know the answer to it, but I am concerned about it.
I agree with you. The point I was trying to make is the Crossfire hurricane investigation based almost entirely on the allegations of Christopher Steele and the sources he provided, which may have in fact been part of a Russian disinformation campaign, which has successfully divided the country and created a lot of chaos in the ensuing 3.5 years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Chairman, if I could just follow up on that, Senator, whether it's Russian disinformation or other disinformation, I think the FBI needs to figure out where did it come from, why was it submitted, and were any crimes committed. I think that's an appropriate area of investigation. I just don't know what the evidence reflects.